99% of clothing isn't produced fair trade, so that's a big one. And then 85% of the textile workers is female. So this is something I always like to take together. Like, so almost all clothing is made by women, and they're almost never paid a fair wage. So if you're a little bit of a feminist, you should really, really think about what kind of clothing you wear, because it's very important if you want to support women that you choose fair trade clothing. And then the last part, of course, 0.6% of the price of a piece of clothing ends up with a textile worker. This is something that you, that's of course an indication, sort of average, but because there's many very expensive brands that don't produce fair at all, and it's not that serious. 0.6% ends up with the workers. But it's a good indication to think about when you see a very cheap T-shirt, that it's just not possible that it's made for I don't know, that you can buy a T-shirt of £5 and that it's fair trade. It's just almost impossible. Okay, so that's a lot of negativity. So how did this fashion industry become so incredibly problematic? For that, you need to know a little bit about how fashion is produced. So here you see a very simple chain of how a cotton T-shirt, in this case an organic cotton T-shirt, is produced. So you start with the cotton seeds. It's made into cotton fiber, then into yarn, then into raw fabric, then it's dyed and finished, and then it's sewn into a T-shirt. Well, of course, most T-shirts are not from 100% cotton. It's all usually a little bit of synthetic fiber in there, and often pieces of clothing are a little bit more complicated than just a T-shirt. So there's a lot of sort of side tracks that you can still put into this scheme, but this is very simply what it usually, well, in its simplest form looks like. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. Like first of all, for the cotton seeds, you need to make the cotton. So you have people working in fields picking this cotton, because it usually still happens by hand. These people are usually not treated very well or earn a good wage, and have to work under the scorching sun for very long hours. And in China, a lot of the cotton there is now actually produced by forced labor by the Uyghur population. So this is also very horrific and something you don't want your clothing to be a part of. Then, of course, this is made into a fabric, and a lot of the cotton already goes through a lot of hands, and this usually all happens in developing countries where they don't have strict labor laws, where they don't have a high minimum wage. So you can sort of assume that, it's often not fair trade, and that how they make it is also not very sustainable. Then you have the dyeing and finishing process, where you often have to dye the fabrics, and those dyes usually just end up in the local rivers, because otherwise you have to treat your wastewater, and that costs extra money. So a lot of companies don't do that, especially if the laws don't require this. And then you have the cutting and sewing process, where you have to think about all the sweatshops where clothing is produced. So this is already, like, every step of the way can be problematic, and a lot of brands don't even see a really large part of this whole chain, because if you're a company, you just want to make something from a certain fabric, you just buy the finished fabric, and you don't see anything that happens before that. So that's why they're usually not very transparent, because they just don't know where their stuff is produced. And then you have, at the finishing process, where they cut and sew everything together, you usually work directly together with a company that can do this for them, and they usually have them sign some sort of code of conduct to make sure that they have fair working practices, if they already care at all. But the problem is that usually this has to happen at such a high pace that this factory doesn't have enough capacity to deal with all the work that they are getting by themselves. So they hire subcontractors, and well, there's absolutely no overview for the brand to see what's happening there. So for a brand to produce under fair and sustainable conditions, they really have to go the extra mile to really look into the supply chain and take that responsibility of seeing where their clothing is made and taking that transparency. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Now I'm just going to continue. I wanted to go over with you guys to see if you can find out by just looking at a piece of clothing if it's sustainable. So I've collected, I've found 2 pieces of clothing that are sort of similar in my own wardrobe. And I would like to ask of you which one you think is more sustainable. So you have on the left, they're both white, they're both shirts, quite similar. One is a bit more expensive than the other. So which one would you, from just seeing these images, think is more sustainable? Please put 1 or 2 in the chat. Okay, we have 1. Go on, guys. You can do this. Make a choice. Getting a lot of 1s. Would one of you would like to explain why you think number 1 is more sustainable? I think the first who answered was Abdul. Would you care to explain your answer? Can be over chat. You can also turn on your mic and briefly explain it.
Is it because it's more expensive? So, I don't know. That would just mean it's more sustainable that way. That was my thinking.
Thank you, Abdul, for your answer. It's funny because I now had 2 groups, and it was tight ripped easily. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have one more answer here that the person on the right, left, right, on the right is wearing tights and they rip easily. I was mostly talking about the shirts, so that wasn't not really taken into account, but yeah, they do. So good point. So most of you probably going on the price here. And I'm not going to reveal yet which one is more sustainable, but I do think that you really need to take into account that prices are not everything. Okay, so what can you pay attention to? Because you already said price, of course. Well, at Project Cece, we look at 5 things: eco-friendly, if something is vegan, if something is locally produced, so produced in Europe, if it has a good cause, like a charity that they support or something like that, and if it's fair trade. So how can you find out about these things from just simply looking at the piece of clothing? Like you already saw, you can see the price, but you don't get any information from that. And the other thing is the washing label. So you can look at that a little bit to get a small indication of if the brand might be sustainable. So what can you see in the washing label? That's the producing country, material, and the washing instructions. So for production country, you can see, well, where it's made. In a lot of clothing is, of course, made in Asia because it's just really cheap, usually. China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, India are all countries where they very often produce clothing. And they're all countries to be known to have very bad working conditions and not paying fair wages, and the minimum wage laying way below the living wage. And well, China, of course, has now been in the news a lot because they just basically completely violate human rights by forcing a very big part of their population to work, to be forced to work, and that's of course very awful. So really watch out for that, especially with cotton. because a really large part of the cotton is produced in China. Then you have Bangladesh. The first picture I showed you when talking about air trade fashion was Bangladesh, where the Rana Plaza building collapse happened. After that, they did make a few changes. You had sort of the Bangladesh Fire Safety Accord, which made it sort of safer. Well, it made a lot of factories safer, but in the end, this did nothing with the wages or just the way people were treated. It's only making sure that there's like proper fire exits. And well, to be honest, I think that's pretty minimal. Then you have, of course, Vietnam and India, which also have very bad working conditions in general. It doesn't mean that everything that's produced there is just bad. That's of course not true. You have a lot of nice fair trade factories there, definitely. But in general, you can assume that 99% of clothing is not fair trade, so probably it isn't. And this is actually for every country where you look at. But of course, there's different chances, because if you look at Europe, or for instance at Portugal, it's just easier to make your supply chain more transparent if you produce closer by. And I know a lot of brands that produce in Portugal, and they usually very open about all the about the working conditions, about their factories. But of course, there's also things happening there. And if you look at Turkey, there were also some big scandals there when we had the whole refugee crisis, with refugees being just forced to work for almost nothing there. America has the same problems, and Africa is now sort of seen as the new Asia, as in it has the same wages, but it doesn't have the bad name just yet. So, okay, that sounds all very negative. Of course, there is definitely fair production going on, but if you see on your label of your clothing produced in Bangladesh and it doesn't say anything about something being certified or fair trade, you're kind of safe to assume the worst. And that feels kind of sad, but it should also be a little bit of a wake-up call that we need to start making better decisions about our clothing. So next, materials. So there can be a lot of materials in your clothing. There are more sustainable materials, and of course, very polluting materials. And I'm gonna circle back to that in the next slide. Yes, so I'm just gonna skip over this for now. And then you have the washing instructions. Of course, it doesn't really matter that much, because you can just, if it says you have to wash it hot, you can just not do that. It's not written in stone or anything, but it is something to take into account, because, for instance, if you buy a linen shirt, linen is a very sustainable material in general, but it does wrinkle very fast. So you might need to iron it every time before you wear it. And that actually is very bad for the environment. So you do need to take that into account. So then it might be better to buy a shirt from, let's say, Tencel, because it wrinkles a lot less fast. And Tencel is actually a very sustainable material. Okay, so I made a table for you guys so that you can have a sort of broad overview of the most common materials. Actually, it's not the most common materials, like some of the most common materials and some very sustainable materials, because of course I would like to give a little bit more attention to materials that are actually very sustainable, such as hemp, linen, bamboo, Tencel, Pinatex, Econyl, because we should also focus a bit on the positive. Like, for instance, Pinatex is a very, very fun material because it's made out of pineapple leftovers. So it's pineapple leather. And from the leftovers from the pineapple industry, they make this sort of fake leather, and it's very sustainable, and it's also just cool to have pineapple shoes or something. So that I really like. And you have Econil, which is a material made from fishing nets they take out of the ocean. So I think, I don't really remember the exact number, but I think like 50% or something of all the plastic that's in the oceans is just discarded fishing nets. So that's a huge problem. So I would say also, on a side note, like if you're really fighting the plastic problem, maybe don't mind the plastic straw so much, but just eat a little bit less fish. It's more effective. But this material is made out of fishing nets they actually take out of the ocean to make a new sort of nylon. And yeah, so they're basically making the whole process more sustainable by, first of all, recycling, and by second of all, really taking plastic out of the ocean and using it as a material to use. So that's for the cool ones. Then of course we also need to look at like what's actually bad for the environment. So cotton is known as sort of like the natural fabric that you see in almost everything. And it's also really not sustainable. It takes up a lot of water to grow it, because cotton is grown in so many places that it often doesn't really belong at the place where you grow it. So then it needs more water, it needs more chemicals, it needs a lot of. Oh, hi, sorry, that's my dog who came in. Yes, and it also, because you need many pesticides and everything, you also erode the soil, and you need quite some resources. So you only use like the top of your cotton plant to make the cotton. So yeah, it's just a lot. For your animal fabric, so you have wool and leather. Well, you need a lot of chemicals to make that into a nice fabric. For instance, for leather, to make the hide you have like the tanning process, and a lot of heavy metals are also used for that. And it's just really, really chemical stuff that is not good for the environment. And of course the animal suffering in this is also quite high, just because of the bio industry. Then, of course, you have all your synthetic fibers, such as polyester, elastane, nylon, which all is basically plastic. So it just builds on the whole plastic problem that we already have. Also, if you wash your plastic synthetic clothing, little microplastics will come free, and these will basically go from your washing machine to the oceans. There's no step here where they are filtered out. And they say now if you eat fish, that's the chance that you have microplastics in you. Eat microplastics is really big, because fishes eat the microplastics, and then you eat them. And I think they said that you eat about a credit card a week in plastic because of this. So that's a lot. We don't really know the health risks of this, but most people don't think this is going to be very good. So then I just want to take a small look at tencel, for instance, and viscose, because viscose is a natural fabric, so is tencel. Sort of, they're both made out of wood, and that they turn into a very soft, silky fabric. The difference between the two is that for tencel, you don't need many chemicals, and they use a closed loop system to catch all the chemicals at the end. And for viscose, they use a lot of chemicals, and it's usually they're usually just dumped somewhere. So they always say sort of that tencel is sort of the sustainable brother of viscose. So that's also something that's interesting. For the rest, they're basically the same. They're good for the soil because it's trees that you grow, and that's, yeah, unless you have monocultures, it's quite all right. So any questions about this? No? Then I would like for you guys, well, you're not sitting next to each other, but to take a look in the clothing that you're wearing, or, well, something laying around in your room, and just take a look at that label. Like if you see anything like the production country, what it's made from, and please share it in the chat, because I think it's very interesting to really look like where your clothing comes from. So I'm going to give you a minute. In the meantime, I maybe can find something laying around myself. I mean, not everything I own is sustainable. I found a vest here, and this one is 80% cotton and 20% polyester, and made in Turkey. So the first two things I'm a little bit negative about. Made in Turkey could mean something good. And yeah, you wash it at 30 degrees. And I don't actually know the brands because I got this secondhand. I don't know the brand, so I think it's not that sustainable, but it's made in Turkey, so I have a little bit of hope. But I see that you guys also took your time and found some things. Iman says made in China, and it's from never know how you pronounce it. Shine? No. Yeah, that's not a very sustainable brand. A cardigan made out of wool in China. Sorry, I can't see that as very sustainable either. And yeah, another one made in Bangladesh. 100% cotton is nice because it's very easy to recycle. So that's a positive thing. But yeah, when the cotton comes out of China, that's kind of a very, very bad thing again. So yeah, and then we have another made in Bangladesh. Shein, thanks, Ivan. Made in Portugal, H&M. H&M I don't trust in general. Sorry. Yeah, Uniqlo is also not very sustainable. Sorry. Actually, this might be a nice one on sidestep. I will put this in the chat so you can actually look this up if you don't know it yet. You can easily sort of check if your brand is sort of sustainable, just to get an indication by using the app Good on You. Oh, not H&M, just okay. Made in Portugal then could be good. But Good on You rates brands on sustainability, and they mostly look at the really big brands. So it's in that way kind of interesting to really do a quick check if something is sustainable or not. And they ask brands to basically fill in a questionnaire, and then they go into discussion sometimes a little bit just to find out the key points where they are sustainable. So yeah, I think the most sustainable brands are actually not on there because they're all very small. H&M sometimes has good quality. I have some dresses from when I was 16 that I can still wear, but yeah, that doesn't mean good quality doesn't mean that it's fair trade or that it's sustainable. And H&M has like a conscious collection, which basically means that 50, like it says this on their website, so you can find it, but they're just greenwashing so hard. It's incredible. But what their conscious collection means is that at least 50% of the materials used in the piece of clothing is from sustainable materials, where they don't say what sustainable means exactly. So that's just a little bit weird. So it could be that it's sustainable in a way that they use BCI cotton, so better cotton initiative cotton, which means that it's a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more fair trade. But it can also it can mean a lot of things. and it doesn't mean that it's fair trade, and it doesn't, and yeah, it can also mean that it's like for the half of it polyester. So yeah, that kind of sucks. Yeah, I hope you already see from where I'm going is that it's really hard to see if your clothing is actually fair trade or sustainable from just looking at the washing label. But at least it gives you a little bit of an idea, what the possibilities could be. Circling back to the shirts I've shown you earlier, I'm afraid you were all wrong. The cheaper shirt was actually sustainable. The left one is from the brand Tommy Hilfiger, which is a quite expensive brand, but they're really not sustainable and really not fair trade. So if you look at the washing labels of these, you can see that this one was made from cotton and spandex in Hong Kong. And the other one was made in Germany, which I think is pretty positive. They're very strict about their labor laws. And it's made from 100% cotton, and it's organic cotton, which is good. And in the label, it even says focus on the good. So that gives you a little bit of a feeling that it might be good. I also know this brand as being very sustainable. They have a lot of information about it on their website. They show who the people are that make the clothing. So that just gives a lot of trust. I also have some more examples of clothing where you can see in the washing label a little bit that it's sustainable. For instance, this pair of shorts, it's made from lyocell, so tencel. That's the material I was talking about earlier. So made from wood using a closed loop material system to take care of the chemicals. No, not now. Oh. And it's made in Germany. And no, it's not made in Germany. It's made in Turkey. And even the label is made from recycled polyester. And the nice thing about sustainable brands is that they often really want to communicate the story behind their clothing to you. So this is from a very, sort of the H&M of sustainable fashion, I usually say, because they have really this focus on sustainability, but they make kind of, hip, stylish clothing they make a lot, so it's also not super expensive. Of course, more expensive than H&M, but still. But they really love to communicate that they're really trying to fight the battle for making the fashion industry more sustainable. And a lot of brands do that. So here you see a number of cards, like a bag that says, I used to be trash, but now I'm fashionable. And another one from, I think, which is this brand? I think it's from People Tree. It's a UK brand. And they just also say, like, let's go organic, fair trade. But how do you really believe this? That's by looking at certifications. I always think that this is a really important part for you to really believe if a brand is actually fair trade. And you can see here, for instance, that this has a fair trade label and a World Fair Trade Organization label and the Soil Association. And these are all well-known certificates, in the fashion industry, that something is actually fair trade. And on the right, you can see the Fair Wear Foundation label, which you can only put on clothing at the moment that you are actually part of the Fair Wear organization and having your work conditions meeting a certain level. And they really report everything about their audits. So it's all put online. So that's already something I think is super positive. And then you have this one as well. That's the Glts Certification. This one basically says that this piece of clothing from seed till end product was made in a fair and sustainable manner. So I really love this certification. If it has this certification, you know almost for sure that it's good. Of course, you can't ever be completely sure, but here you actually know that it's better than most, and yeah, that they really care about the people that made the clothing. So that's already a lot. Probably don't really know what all the certifications mean. I'm currently working on a certification guide on our website, but yeah, you can see all the certifications also on our website, just with the clothing. Yeah, I do think it's very important to know a few of them and know which ones are actually meaning something and which ones are just empty words used for greenwashing. And that's also the next thing I want to talk about. I don't really know if you guys know what the term greenwashing means, but it's kind of a big deal lately. So I'm assuming that you know a little bit at least. So greenwashing is basically brands trying to appear more ethical than they are. And they do this usually by focusing on very small sustainable wins, like saying that they produce the first completely recycled shoe, or saying that they now will only use organic cotton for the cotton that they use, because this is of course things that will definitely have an impact and definitely are good, but it says nothing about if the clothes are produced in a fair way, and it says nothing about the rest of their collection. It's just trying to focus on a small part of their production, and as you already saw, the production chain for most clothing is huge, and just focusing on the small part of that and saying we're doing that point right, so we're completely sustainable. And that's of course, well, total bullshit. So yeah, that's just something you should watch out for, and it's happening a lot. So yeah, it can be hard. Yeah, another thing you can watch out for then is like if they're being transparent about the rest of their production, and if they're using vague terms about sustainability, like saying we use sustainable materials, but not specifying which, or we really care about our employees, but not saying where they produce. So these kind of things are things you can watch out for. And I want to take this with all this in mind. I was asked to make this also a bit more for you guys. So we're going to look at the Cheney school uniforms. So you might be wondering, like, how sustainable is your school uniform, and how do you find more information about that? Well, the most reliable thing to do usually is, well, the thing I do when I look into if a brand is sustainable or not, is the first thing I just go to their website, see what they have to say about themselves. And if I want more information, then I usually just send an email to ask them about how they produce. So this is the information I found on the website of the people that produce your uniform. The only thing I could find about the production is that they said that they work closely with manufacturing mills, and we provide a comprehensive range of garment sourcing from the UK manufacturers wherever possible. So they produce in the UK when possible. I don't know. That doesn't say a lot. They did win some sustainability awards in 2019 because they help parents to recycle and resell old school uniforms. And they say also that like they drive sustainability on 3 key activities, which is promoting recycling of school uniforms, using an initiative created by parents called Old School Uniform, reducing the amount of virgin plastic by replacing all carrier mail bags with 100% recycled and 100% recyclable versions. I always think that's a little bit hard. So are they saying here that it should be either recycled or recyclable? Because usually if you make something from recycled plastic, it's really hard to recycle it another time and completely almost always impossible to recycle into the same product. And the last part is they have partnered with Boots to Africa, so a charity. So what do you guys think? Is this school uniform sustainable from this information, or would you say that this is a bit greenwashing? Please put it in the chat what you think. Nobody wants to say anything? Come on, guys. What do you think?
Go on. Does anybody got anything to say? How about you, Abdul? What do you think? What do you think of the school uniform service?
I mean, from what they're saying, I guess you can say it's sustainable. They've won some awards, and it says that they use 100% recycled and 100% recyclable version. So, but that could just all be like a front. They could just all say that. So, I don't really know. You have to err on the side of caution, I guess.
I think that's a good point. I do want to say there that they use that only for the mail bags. They use recycled versions. Only for the mail bags. For the rest. I mean, you guys have been wearing these uniforms for probably a good couple of years. So you might have looked into the label there. And you might know more than I do. Somebody else would like to weigh in? Oh.
I think Eloise, yeah.
I just wanted to say that although I kind of see where you're talking about that, like the actual clothing isn't very sustainable, there are some, I think there is a way that some people have made it sustainable. Like for me, I don't know about anyone else, but I bought the blazer I currently wear about 2-3 years ago. So I've not actually had to buy a new one. So I think that is like a more sustainable option rather than wholly saying it's not.
Yeah, but in like 2 to 3 years you grow and you need to get a bigger size blazer, especially for like boys.
I totally agree.
That's a point, but I haven't had to do that, so I don't know.
No, but I'm really not trying to say that this is in any way your fault. Of course, this is just something I saw when I looked at this website, and when I see this, I just immediately think, okay, they don't say anything about where they produce. They don't say anything about the materials they use. It's probably not sustainable. Of course, I could be wrong. They maybe just don't want to advertise where they produce. But in these cases, I would always like to follow up with a brand and say, hey, where do you produce? Who made my clothing? What kind of materials do you, what do you really do to be more sustainable? Because I think, of course, like what Eloise said, like, yes, it's of course super sustainable to wear your clothing for a longer time. But yeah, it's usually for people growing such as yourself, it's also really hard to do such a thing. And that's why I actually think it's really great that parents created an old school uniform website where you can trade in your school, where you can get a secondhand uniform. And I would also say like that's something you should all support. If you're done with your school uniform, make sure that it doesn't end up in the trash. Yeah, you probably have a system for that already. I don't know. I didn't look into it that long. But I could see from this that, yeah, there's definitely a lot of stuff going on here that's just probably not completely sustainable. And I wouldn't say that you immediately have to stop buying your uniforms there, because I don't think that you have that much power, but there's a lot of stuff you can do, and I want to focus on that. So what you can do is, first of all, demand transparency. So you can email the people that make these uniforms and ask them, how is the clothing made, who makes them, what kind of materials do they use. And I think that's something that's, first of all, for everything you buy, most important is just that you know where it comes from. We live in a sort of information society these days where you can look almost everything up, and where everything, where you can research a lot from just sitting behind your desk. So I would really like to encourage you to just go that little extra mile and do the research. Second of all, in a few weeks, it's Fashion Revolution Week. This is between the 19th and the 25th of April. And this is a period where we try to raise awareness. Fashion Revolution is an organization that really tries to raise awareness for the people that make your clothes. So ask who made my clothes, make a picture with the clothing that you're a little bit iffy about, post yourself with it on social media with the hashtag who made my clothes and tag the brand. In this way, you'll create more awareness, and you'll also kind of force the brand to answer. Third, of course, make sure your uniform doesn't land in the trash, and try to do secondhand. This is, of course, just prolonging the lifetime of your uniform. I think, that's just the longer, like Eloise already said, the longer you use a piece of clothing, the more sustainable it becomes. And last, if you find out it's completely unsustainable, not fair trade at all, and you want a big change, then you can actually do that. You can protest, you can start a petition and let your voice be heard, because you have a really big opportunity here. Like, I never really thought about this because we don't have school uniforms in the Netherlands. But if you can make sure that school uniforms are produced in a fair way and from sustainable materials, you can make a huge impact on, just this part of the industry. And I think that would be really great if young people like yourselves would be able to do such a thing. So I think there's so much you can do there. And of course, next to the school uniforms, you can always try to buy more sustainable. You can do that on our website, but you can also buy secondhand. And there's a lot of options.